welcome to the National Code Enforcement Network with myself, Pete Roque. My partner, Cecilia Muela, is out there teaching for the state of Virginia today, so she will be unable to join us. But we do have an interesting and awesome guest, Shane Diller. He is currently in Irving, Texas. He is the actually acting Cowboy president currently. So we're going to discuss a little bit about Cowboy, the benefits of Cowboy, also the integration between code enforcement and building, and we'll talk a little bit about his move over to another state, which is interesting. So, all right, with that, how you doing, Shane?
I'm good, Pete. Thanks for inviting me to participate, and I'm thrilled to be here.
When we invited you, we didn't expect you to be in Texas.
I didn't either when we first talked about doing this. This was not in the cards, so
That's
everything happens change happens quickly sometimes.
Wow, I mean, it's crazy. It's a crazy pivot. So, I normally like the origin story and how you kind of got started in code enforcement at Cowboy. So, I know you were a police chief at one time.
Mhm.
So, let's go back, scale it back to when you were a young lad and say, hey, I want to be a police chief slash, deputy assistant director, and now the manager over here in Irving, Texas.
Absolutely. No, so just for the record, I don't think anybody ever starts out saying they want to be a police chief. My career basically right out of high school was law enforcement. I went to the academy the year after high school. I was one of the youngest people in my academy class at the time at 19, and just went in police work. And I did police work of one kind or another for a good almost 10 or 12 years before I ended up working for a small city in Northern California, the city of Ileton. And when I say small, it was a city of about 1,000 people at the time. So it was a small city. And as the police chief there, there wasn't a whole lot of crime in the traditional sense. So one of the things that the department undertook was nuisance abatement, code enforcement, and that sort of thing. And I had very little, if no, concept as to what that term even meant. Like, what are we trying to do exactly? And I connected with some great people who kind of taught me the ins and outs of the administrative enforcement world. And then I, took some formal classes that the American River College was offering at the time, and really sort of trained myself and some of my officers in that administrative end of things. How to issue administrative notices and how to, to do enforcement outside of the criminal realm. And I fell in love with it. One of the reasons why I landed on it was because in law enforcement, I had been a broken windows policing nerd. And I had, was a big believer and still am in the fact that if police agencies and local governments in general can focus on small issues, they prevent them from becoming big ones. That's basically sort of the underpinning of broken windows policing. And I saw code enforcement as that dealing with disorder at its base level, of being able to really dive in and address issues related to blight and related to nuisances before it became an environment that was attractive to greater criminal activity. And so I, spent a good almost 3 years there in Ileton. And, as many police chiefs do, I actually spent the last 6 months I was with the city as their acting city manager, in addition to being their police chief. And I realized, it's time to grow, time to move on. And I started looking around, and I really had fell in love with code enforcement and the positive impacts it could change. And so I looked for a code enforcement position, and the city of Elk Grove, which was one I drove through every day from home to work going to Ileton, was hiring in code enforcement. And I threw my hat in the ring, and they were kind enough to give a small town cop a chance to do something a little different. And I took the bull by the horns. I recently listened to your podcast with Ben Bredmore from Maine, and the way he described the work he did, where he was the inspector and the plans checker and the chief bottle washer and wore all the hats, was very similar, I think, to the work I did in Ileton. Where I was the acting city manager and the police chief and helped run public works, and I think they made me a battalion chief in the volunteer fire department. I mean, it was a little bit of everything. that we were doing there. So when I came to Elk Grove and just was working in code enforcement, I still had that breadth of experience from my time in police work to the other elements of local government I was involved in. And I was able to leverage that so that code enforcement was really able to be a force multiplier for everyone and really be able to connect with public works and to connect with police and fire and see how the investigative and enforcement tools we have in the administrative realm there were able to help those other departments accomplish the work they were trying to do, in addition to our pure sort of nuisance mission that we had, dealing with zoning and nuisances and those sorts of things. So I did that, as the code enforcement manager and helping out in other duties as assigned, as you sometimes do in cities, for a few years at Elk Grove when we reorganized and code enforcement was moved out of neighborhood services and into building safety. And so I became sort of the second in command of the building official. And it was another one of those things where I didn't have a lot of experience on the technical end of the building code and processes. So I dove in headfirst and began to learn about the administration of a building department and the processes and what the staff needed. And I helped our building official there at the time, run the department for a handful of years. And then he retired. And once again, the city looked to reorganize, and they created a development services department where they took the standalone departments of building safety and the standalone department of planning, and then the division of engineering and housing and code enforcement and all these things, and moved it into one department where I became the assistant director. And they basically had sort of merged the building official's job and the code enforcement manager's job into one assistant director's position. And I oversaw both of those functions. And that's where I really started to sink my teeth into the administrative and legal ends of running the building safety side of things. No one, believe me, to this day, and the staff that I've worked with, who I love dearly, and I think they probably feel fondly about me, I guess, they all recognize, we all know, you don't want me inspecting anything. I'm not the guy you want to send in to place to look at the nail sizes or to check the joists or any of that sort of stuff. My technical expertise is still not up to par with some of the people that are doing the real job of what we do. I'm much more a budget and policy and politics nerd in this field, and I embrace that. I don't have a problem with that at all. That's my realm. That's my comfort zone, and so that led me into doing work with CalBO and with California building officials, and teaching classes in code enforcement to start with, and then search and seizure, and then marijuana, and just all sorts of things that were information folks needed that was not from that very traditional side of the building safety function. I didn't get into teaching the the updates to the codes or any of that sort of stuff. I stayed in the administrative and investigative end of things, but it led me into working with the legislative side of things, and in monitoring bills and in advocating for good policy in the Capitol there in Sacramento. And that's, I think, what led me then to running for the CalBO board. And in 2016, I threw my hat in the ring as a director at CalBO, and the membership was either smart enough or foolish enough, depending on your perspective, to elect me to their board of directors. And have served on the board of directors there now for the last 6 years, and enjoyed every minute of that, getting to connect with people in the building safety field, in the fire prevention field, and in code enforcement around California and the country through CalBO has been invaluable to me in my career development. But also, hopefully, I've done some great work in those fields to be able to raise the profile of the industries and to advocate for not only good policies and good laws that we need to do our jobs well, but on sort of broadening that concept of what we look at as a building safety professional. It's not just the inspector, not just the plans examiner. It's also the fire prevention officer, and it's the code enforcement staff, and it's your permit techs and admins. We're all working together in that field to create a safe built environment, and we just all sort of have our specialties to it. And I think that I've worked hard successfully to continue to build those bridges and to broaden that scope of what we see as a building safety professional. And so yes, as the last over 2 years now, and I'll be honest with you, the term of a CalBO president is 1 year or slightly less, depending on how the year runs. And because of COVID, we took a pause on our meetings and elections. So my term has now run for 2 years instead of one. And then we had a snafu with our venue in the city of Los Angeles here in late January, early February. So we had to move what was going to be our late March ABM to the second week of May now in Palm Springs. And not that there's a bad reason to go to Palm Springs, but I'm now, absolutely. I'm now, continuing in the role briefly for just a little while longer, and have ended up, being the longest serving CalBO president in history, with no intention of taking on that role. But I've absolutely loved it, and I've loved serving our members and getting to know everyone. And though yes, I have recently made the move to Irving, Texas, to be the code enforcement director. My heart will always be with CalBO and with California and our members there. And, as appropriate and as possible, I'll continue to stay engaged. I'm sure I'll see everyone at national conferences through ICC and ACE and various trainings and stuff. But I am now, as of the last week or so, out in Irving, Texas, and am looking for this next chapter of my career, and to see where everything I've sort of gathered in my toolbox so far takes me and benefits the citizens I serve now.
Awesome, Shane. So, and it's funny, like when I get to, talk to a lot of guests, a lot of times we talk about it from the technical side, and I love the administrative portion of it. I always tell people, you know what, I can lay tile. I do a fantastic job, but it's a lot of hard work. What? I've done it. I can do it. If I need to do it, I can do it. But at the end of the day, I'm the person that goes and gets the bids and hires the contractors and does all the job to make sure it gets done and oversees it. And I think, having that discussion as far as the managerial portion of it, that doesn't really get discussed on a building safety side, because everybody's always like, oh, we need to concentrate on safety. But the management component is so important, because you got to make sure that your inspectors are doing the right thing, that they're serving the customers at a correct time. Even with code enforcement, you have to make sure you use an educational type of approach. Not only that, but giving people options and the opportunity to voluntarily comply. So
absolutely.
That's one of the things that, us as managers, that we have to talk about. And, you and I being in a managerial role, sometimes we have to deal with those tough political issues, even though, we have to find fair and resolutions, So let's go back to, your time as a police officer. I had a Chief DeRay and I had Chief Solano on the show before, and we talked about the value of code enforcement and the police department. And one of the things I always tell, when I talk to, different police folks, I go, look, you guys take care of the bees, we take care of the hive. We're in it for the long term, and talking about the broken windows theory, that's something that really doesn't get discussed. And it does, but it doesn't get discussed like on a more like surface level. And I'll give you an example, like a hoarder house. You may have a house, that one house on the block where everybody knows that's the hoarder house. So people start moving out of the neighborhood. So you get people that really don't mind it to come in, and they kind of share some of the same, I would say, tendencies to like store stuff in the yard,
Sure.
or, and it kind of dominoes, and people don't see that if you nip it in the bud quick, actually you get a better resolution, a longer term resolution, So we had Rachel, our co-host on Friday, says, thank you for your service, sir. Yes. Being I want to kind of get a perspective from, you're going from law enforcement to code enforcement. What's the biggest challenge that some people transitioning, because we do get a lot of police officers that want to transition over to code enforcement
Sure.
at the end of the tenure. What's something that you would say would be a kind of a difficult thing for them to transition to that they're not used to?
I think the biggest hurdle that you have there in changing the mindset is recognizing that code enforcement is slower and more deliberative in most situations than law enforcement is. Law enforcement is, it's 911. It's responding to something in progress and dealing with it right then and there to address that problem. You write a citation into court, or you tow a vehicle, or you take someone to jail and start that prosecution process is all much faster than what we do in code enforcement. In code enforcement, it's the due process of notice and opportunity to correct, and that's one of the things that I see as a positive for code enforcement, is that code enforcement is not about generating a fine or generating a fee, and law enforcement isn't either, but it's fees and fines are something that are tools in law enforcement that occur much faster. You write a citation for speeding, or you write a citation for something that occurs right then, and the fine is the punishment. You're off to the next thing. In code enforcement, our goal is long-term change, and our goal is working with residents so that they understand the standards that we're trying to achieve, and then giving them an opportunity to get to that before you ever get to the point to where you're writing someone a citation with a fine, or you're issuing them a fee of some kind. And if you have codes either adopted at the local level, or that you're adopting from the model codes, that are supported by your community, you're going to have a very high rate of voluntary compliance, and you're going to have an opportunity to just work with people for them to accomplish that change, so that the environment is improved without doing any of the get tough things by way of court actions or of fines or fees that can be punitive. And I've really enjoyed that part. And it's much more about problem solving than it is about the enforcement, technicalities. And then on the flip side, you do achieve those long-term goals. And somebody coming out of police work, knows that oftentimes the person that you have cited, or the person you've arrested, is back out, back in the street or back in their home long before you're done with the paperwork sometimes. And if you're able to transition your mindset so that understanding that code enforcement is about achieving that long-term goal and making sure that neighborhoods and communities have a higher quality of life on the ongoing basis, and not just about solving the problem that's in front of you at the time, it's very rewarding. And I think that those are the things that I impart to people that are looking to make a change out of traditional police work into code enforcement.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always say, in code enforcement, you have to deal with a lot of gray. It's not really black and white, so you do have to deal with the gray and negotiate, and and say, okay, am I really going to press this issue because the guy left one thing on his side yard versus the yard was super clean, like super messy, or
Right.
am I going to cite this 80-year-old lady for not picking up the dead fruit in front of her house?
Right.
And these are things that you go to councils like, sir, we were finding her every day because she had dead fruit in her yard, and a little 90-year-old lady comes out, and you seem like such a jerk,
Yes.
And I tell folks, look, a lot of times, and I've done this personally, like sometimes, the elderly can't put their trash cans away. I'll put them away for you. Something that simple. And some people is like, oh no, it's a liability. I'm like, look, we're just trying to get compliance. These folks need to know we're community partners. And I think, and going back to the community partner thing, Elk Grove did a great outreach program. Some of the, I use the internet to show people, and you guys have a great thing on Code Enforcement 101. And, you guys are probably one of the, if you type in Google Code Enforcement 101, the Elk Grove video will pop up. It's normally one of the first ones.
That's great.
And to me, it's important. And, I think this was done under, your tenure there. So can you tell us a little bit about the importance of outreach to the community when it comes to code enforcement and why you're doing it, and what works for you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and you're right to I think that the team at Elk Grove, Rosa Tapia, the manager there, and her team value that community interaction more than anybody I've seen so far in our field. And I'm very pleased with the Code Enforcement 101 that the team there put together, and continues to walk people through that sort of understanding of what code enforcement is, because you have to start with the fact that many residents of your city will understand what the fire department does, and they'll know what the police department does, and they'll understand solid waste will haul away the trash and recycling and that sort of thing. But a lot of them stop and they go, well, wait, what is code enforcement? How does code enforcement work? And I think starting with that education of what code enforcement is as a field and as a profession is important. And you sort of distinguish what we do, what we're focused on, and then reinforcing how we do that. The education first model that many agencies successfully use is something that we can all tout and make sure they understand that a contact from code enforcement is nothing to fear, and that it's something that we're there, a partner to work with them and a partner to educate them on the various areas of either model codes that we've adopted or local codes you've adopted that need compliance, and how to get to where we need everybody to be, not just so that the rules are followed, but so that that environment that people are living and working and doing business in is better. That it protects every resident and every property owner from deterioration and bad actions of other property owners. Because often you hear the refrain of, oh, it's my property and I should be able to do what I want. And if you've adopted codes that are supported by your community, those codes are intended to make sure that a single actor, a single property owner isn't able to do things, with their property or take actions in certain ways that cause deterioration to the people around them and the community around them. And if we view it through that lens, I think many people will both understand what we're trying to do and then also appreciate the efforts that the hardworking people that are on the street and in the field every day do to make sure that standards are met and that everything is healthy, safe, and nice looking.
Yeah. One of the things that I always tell code officers, look, when you're explaining to the general public on what it is that code enforcement does, I would say, look, break it down like you're telling 5 to to an 8-year-old, because we can talk about code enforcement and be very technical, and people are going to look around like, what are you talking about? End of the day, I'm like, look, I'm here to make sure your street's clean and you have a safe place to live, that it's not going to fall on you, it's not going to burn up, and that's my role. And even explaining, a lot of people, and it's funny because I challenge anybody to, when you talk to residents, say, hey, do you know what a model code is? And people are gonna say, what are you talking about? Well, do you know where these codes come from? And these are state regulations that come, and I'll give you an example, like a charred electrical socket. Why is it in a fire code? Because it's been compromised. It has potential for fire or shorting. So you explain that to them and say, hey, look, I just need it to be changed out. We can come back. And if you didn't give them options, say, hey, you know what? You may want to hire an electrician. You may want to do some maintenance on it. You may have to turn off your breaker. Just whatever you need to do to keep them at ease. That hey, it's not the biggest expense in the world, because most people look at code enforcement as like, oh Lord, now they're going to cost me more money. Even contractors. I get contractors all the time. Well, I've been doing this for 30 years, and you know what? I go, sir, I understand, but in those 30 years, you should have learned that you needed permits. One time or another.
Yeah, and not jokingly, sometimes you hear that. Well, I've been doing this for, I've gotten away with this for years and years and years, and in a not joking way, I often congratulate them. I said, hey, listen, I get it. You've had a great run. Okay. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily been legal all this time. And so now, we've caught up to you, and we appreciate your help in complying and doing it right going forward. And not in a sarcastic way. I mean, they should look at that as a win in some ways. That, hey, you know what, I was able to get by with this, but now we're not doing that now.
No, of course, and just in talking to a lot of these contractors, most of them know they're supposed to get permits, and they know, and just educating the public and saying, hey, look, I understand that this structure was unlawfully altered. I know you probably didn't do it. And I always tell the story, like my first encounter with code enforcement was when I was like 19. I was in the military, and my brother had a seizure, and the fire department had a hard time taking him out of the house because we had an illegal structure in the rear, which we bought that way. Which you'll hear it like, I bought it like that. Well, you know what? In this case, we bought it like that. It caused my parents so much grief, and at that point, I realized the impact that code enforcement officers have. Because I've sat through, like where I've dealt with a senior citizen, their daughter or son came by and says, look, they can't sleep, they can't eat, they're so stressed out about this. And I have to bring them in and say, look, I want you to look at this whole case as a pizza. I only need you to do a slice at a time, maybe in half a slice, but I need some progress in order for me to justify to keep giving you more time.
Sure.
Because that's one thing that a lot of folks forget, that this has been a problem for 10 years. Yeah, we can give them a 30-day extension. It's not going to kill you. And I think that human element with code enforcement sometimes gets lost, where it puts us in a particular situation where it could be dangerous, because somebody's upset. How do you stop upset people? You give them options, you give them control of their situation. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, you get a better resolution in voluntary compliance, which brings me to my next topic. In the code enforcement 101s, you guys were probably one of the first people that had safety regulations intact, before SB 296. So can you tell us a little bit about, the measures that you took to make sure that your officers have some sort of safety, while performing their duties?
Sure. Yeah. No. One of the things that we examined back in 2008 in Elk Grove was the interactions that the code enforcement officers had. Sort of did a threat analysis, if you will, of what occurred, and then we sort of looked at what are great defensive strategies we can put in play. And whether that was formal training in regards to things like verbal judo or de-escalation, or being able to communicate with people well, to communication strategies. I think honestly, of all the tools you can hang on someone and all of the equipment you can buy them and give them, the biggest thing that I have seen help in regards to safety for the officers on the street is a direct and steady communication line with local law enforcement, so that law enforcement knows where they're at, what they're doing, and that when they call for help, there's help readily available to them. So we made sure that the code enforcement officers had radios that could communicate with the patrol units, and that worked two ways. And the patrol units were very quick to be able to communicate with the code enforcement officers and ask questions and report what they were seeing. We put them on the police department's computer-aided dispatching system, so that the dispatchers could see where the officers were in the field, and they could enter their locations and the various things they were doing in that way, so that there was real-time information in regards to where the officers were, and help sort of track their safety. We did provide body armor, so that the officers had another piece of defensive equipment that done right doesn't have to look aggressive, or doesn't have to be something that militarizes, if you will, the look of the officer. And then we provided tasers. A lot of code enforcement officers, fire prevention staff, they'll be issued pepper spray, or they'll be issued the small canisters of tear gas, that sort of thing, that mace, traditionally it's called. And one of the things that anybody who's worked with that type of equipment for a long time realizes it's incredibly messy. The moment you have to use it, it's going to get on them, you, everything around you, all of you. It's not a terribly efficient, though it can be effective, not a terribly efficient deterrent. And we worked with the city's police department there to examine the use of a taser in a defensive way. So that, because one of the things we found was that aggressive animals, specifically aggressive dogs, were repelled at any sort of electricity. And just the arcing, not having to fire, not having to aim, not even having to hit the animal with the taser, just having the cartridge off and arcing the taser
Yeah.
causes an aggressive animal to back up and not, they don't want to mess with electricity. And just knowing that, we leaned in heavily to equipping the community services officers in the PD, the animal control officers, and the code enforcement officers with that defensive device, so that it's not about apprehension; it's about being able to escape a situation. Whether it's what we were angling for was dealing with aggressive animals. Obviously, it could also deter an aggressive person. When that came up, and made the tool available. I'm pleased to report that at least as of when I left the city of Elk Grove a couple of weeks ago, there had not been an incident where the staff there had to need to utilize these tools. That all of the underpinning of safety that is built into the philosophy of the program creates an environment to where you never really get to having to use the tools that you have there for the worst case scenario. Knock on wood, I hope that continues to this day. And I'm not by any means advocating that any certain piece of equipment is right for every agency or right for every environment. I think that as the new law in California reinforces that every agency should just stop and look at the threats that they encounter and take an exploration of the strategies that are involved and really figure out what works best for them. Is it a change in the style and way they work? Is it particular tools or particular equipment? The answer could be one or all or none of those, depending on what you're looking at. So it was exciting for me to kind of lead a charge there and be a little innovative, and it's given me great perspective on how to approach that stuff going forward.
No, that's awesome. And I tell certain jurisdictions, because sometimes you have jurisdictions in plain clothes still, so there's no identifiable, thing. So if an officer gets attacked, you wouldn't know it's a code enforcement officer. So we advocate, hey, you should have some sort of insignia on your, on your shirt or on your badge or whatever, and also like you see jurisdictions driving their own vehicles. That's why it's important to say, hey, you know what, we might need some confidentiality, in our state bill. But at the end of the day, jurisdictions are, for the most part, are trying to do their best and trying to comply with SB 296. But it's hard because a lot of folks don't know, especially management, they don't know how to make an assessment because they really don't know what their code enforcement officers do. So a lot of times you have to knuckle down and say, hey, you know what, our code officers deal with animals. What's a good repellent for animals? I mean, I've seen folks in the Azusa area with shotguns because they deal with bears.
Yeah.
So
yes. Your physical environment can dictate oftentimes what you need as much as anything else. I mean, if you're out in an exceptionally rural area or in a mountainous area where you have large cats or bears or that sort of thing, learning strategies for dealing with those things is just as important as in an urban environment dealing with aggressive dogs or various things you'd encounter there.
Yeah. So and it's interesting. What's up? So with Cabo, what's some of the things that you before prior to you going to Texas? What are some of the things that Cabo was really looking at? As far as legislative stuff, I know SB 9 was one of the big issues that you guys were dealing with last year. So what are some issues that you guys are dealing with? And also, as far as Cabo goes, integrating some code enforcement training. You did a great marijuana course that I've gotten rave reviews from it, and I didn't get to attend it, but like, oh wow, this Shane Diller guy, he does great marijuana enforcement stuff. I'm like, all right, cool, I want to check it out. So
thanks.
So, what is it that Cowbo's working on, and things that we, us as viewers should be aware of, in California and maybe abroad.
I think that the theme in what Calbo's doing on the legislative front is multi-pronged. There's always discussion of ADU regulations and housing allowances and trying to deal with the housing crisis. There's seismic resiliency legislation and topics that Calbo has both supported and opposed. In regards to the older housing or an older, building stock in agencies. But the one theme that Calbo always focuses on is trying to make sure that we're not legislating code standards, that we're really trying to reinforce that the code adoption process that is set up through ICC is one, and then in California through the Building Standards Commission, is one that should be respected. And one of the things we regularly bristle at is any sort of mandate that comes through legislation that skirts or circumvents the code adoption process itself. California is unique in the fact that it has just about every kind of environment and every kind of geography that a state can bring. And so you can't adopt legislation that necessarily treats California as a whole. When we looked at seismic resiliency, we didn't want to mandate on, Northern California or Central Valley agencies the same type of earthquake inventories and stuff that you'd have to do in the Bay Area or in Southern California where there's greater risk. We really liked the legislator the drafting these bills to take a look at the state in regions or in parts, so that you weren't burdening agencies with something that was unnecessary to them, or in fact, you weren't adopting something that would leave out agencies in other areas where it was really concerning. And so California is a unique legislative environment because we have a very active full-time legislature, and they're very quick to react to things in a legislative way. And so, prior to COVID and in the last year or so since we've begun to come out of the pandemic, they've focused a lot on housing policy and housing law and on those sorts of things that on their face you may think doesn't have a lot of impact to building standards or to building safety. But in fact, if you're going to both expect the local agency that has to administer all of this to be responsive and to be, as quickly as they can in working with new development, and then layering on, continued additional regulations or state mandates, you're going to create a problem that the builders are going to encounter that Calbo likes to make sure that we have a balance to. We want to make sure that if there's new regulation, that it's purposeful and that it's something that would not slow down or will not hinder an agency's resources to be able to serve the community they're trying to serve at their counter every day.
Yeah, and one of the things I can appreciate about Cabo is your communicative methods. You guys are good about dispersing, information. You're in Elk Grove. I'm down here in the in the LA County area, but even the San Diego County area. You hear some. You sit in through one of their meetings, and then they're discussing things from Cabo or their local chapters. So that's something that I think some other chapters or or different agencies should take note of. I belong to the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers, and we get information, but I don't think we get it as much as Calbo does. And which kind of led us in Orange County to create more of a code enforcement chapter, just to kind of tie in some of the building stuff in regards to some of the property maintenance stuff that the state association offers. So, ICC and Calvo is more geared towards the building, the built environment stuff. So, a lot of times you need that extra, I guess, wealth of knowledge, you might say, so.
Yeah.
So what are something that Calvo's working on in regards to anything code enforcement? Is there anything in the works that you're saying, hey, maybe we need more training, or some 101 on some of the building stuff, so
Sure.
a code enforcement officer can be more palatable for them?
At Calbo, Our training, especially in the code enforcement realm, our training is regularly geared towards trying to make sure that the building officials and the senior inspectors, the supervisors, that management end of things really understand how code enforcement works,
Yeah.
and whether they're supervising or overseeing a code enforcement program, or whether they're connecting with one in a different department that's serving as the enforcement arm of what they're doing, that they understand the processes and they understand how to leverage that in the best way possible. And so every year, the Calbo Training Institute meets and we look at, okay, what's the emerging trend? What are the things that we feel like we need to do? There's some staples that we will always offer in a regular cycle. There's a practical code enforcement for building officials class that I've taught for over 10 years, and that we continue to. Frank Bush, the retired superintendent of building safety for the city of LA, has taught that class as well. And it's something that will continue to come back in cycle. Every couple of years we'll want to teach that, because you have new people moving into management or new people moving into the industry that need the nuts and bolts of the basics. And then every year we look and sort of say, what's the trending topic this year? Last year, like you mentioned, it was continued updates to marijuana enforcement and marijuana strategies. And the commission will continue to meet and look at what the emerging trend is, and try to make sure that the training is topical. One of the things I always throw out to folks is that if there's something that they're feeling like, what we really wish the people in the building industry or in the building safety management end of things knew about what we're doing or knew about a particular area, that you send that to us so that we can then look at it and try to put on something to really educate our folks. And if there's something that that Calbo's uniquely situated, because it's got this robust statewide reach, that's uniquely situated to offer as a training class at the various ed weeks or through a webinar or something like that, that we get those ideas. Because we are the first ones to admit that we're not going to think of all the great ideas ourselves. We really want to hear from the members and from our partner industries as to what they feel like they're needing and what they maybe haven't seen in a little while. So I can't say exactly what, other than I know the practical code enforcement for building officials class will continue to cycle back. I can't say for certain what the hot topics will be as we go into next fall or even after. But I know that Calbo works to keep things fresh,
Yeah.
and to keep things timely in regards to the training that they offer.
One of the things, Shane, that I've seen, with code enforcement, with good divisions out there that work really well with their building departments, the slap houses, the illegal gambling areas, that where they did all sorts of electrical alterations, even the weed dispensaries or the weed grows, they're doing all sorts of crazy electrical and plumbing, really close to each other without any protection. And that could cause severe fire damage. And those are things that a lot of code enforcement officers don't really kind of look at. They're looking more from a nuisance point of view, like land use. And a
Sure.
lot, so they're using these tools like receiverships, which is, they're good tools, or injunctions, but a lot of times you can get it really squared away really fast with using the building code. And
Absolutely.
I think people forget, like, when you're blocking, weed dispensaries, in their attempt to, shade their activities, they block off all the windows, and you're creating egress issues, and then you have a wall to let them in. So you're creating even more egress issues. People, can realize, I'm like, hey, this change of use has become dangerous. It could be, either red tagged or to something to that extent. And I think when code enforcement officers realize that these tools exist, I mean, how many volumes of California code books are there? There are tons.
Yeah.
And I tell people, look, PD that knows how to use code enforcement properly, they are probably the fastest, swiftest. They tend to, a lot of crime tends to relocate to the next city over, and then that city calls that city. It's like, hey, how'd you guys do that? Well, we did it like this. So they copy, and then the people move over to the next city.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, displacement is something that, especially when you're dealing with nuisances and stuff, it's pretty easy for the problem to move.
Yeah.
And if you stay connected with the surrounding agencies you're working with, and you approach things as much as you can from sort of a regional approach, you prevent that displacement so that they recognize that they're not going to be, left alone or able to operate just by moving across a jurisdictional boundary.
Yeah, and I tell folks, all the time, learn your building code. I mean, zoning code's great, building code, even public works. People don't use public works as much, like,
Yeah.
hey, yeah, they're encroaching onto the street, they're causing this, they're causing that. Like, when you have a whole room full of ingredients, you're gonna make something good. Good happen sooner or later.
Absolutely. Well, and it's that holistic approach to serving, our citizens. It's not very often what we're dealing is not going to fit in one neat box. It's going to take a partnership between the various agencies that deal with these things. And, I've seen situations where you're dealing with inoperable vehicles and they'll get a tag from the PD to move it off the street and they'll put it in the driveway. And then code enforcement will come along and tag it in the driveway and they'll move it back to the street. And you're not solving the issue. You're just sort of punting it. You're playing tennis with this violation with another department. And so going in and a more holistically approaching how do we solve this, and maybe educating them from from the very beginning. Hey, listen, this is what you need to do with this vehicle. Don't move it back to the street because PD will then, and that's also not legal. It's the it's that broad information that helps the resident really understand what the city or the county is looking for as a whole, rather than just trying to solve the problem of the moment.
Yeah, and just going back to the issues with the car in California, we have the abandoned vehicle abatement program. In some cities that don't have it, we have public nuisance hearings where we say, hey, you got 10 days to remove your vehicle, or it's going to get towed because it's unregistered, inoperable, and it's been there for like the last 20 years. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, we understand you took your prom date on that Toyota Camry, but guess what? Hey, you know what? It needs to move on, or you need to register it or fix it, or it needs to be operable. So okay, so cool. So we covered pretty much all the stuff, and I want to get some good stuff. So transitioning over from California to Texas, and a lot of us sometimes we get stuck in a jurisdiction. I'm not saying that you got stuck, but you want to make a change and you want to move to another state, to kind of experience their things. So what tell me about the transition, and tell me what you're seeing in difference between California and Texas.
Sure. Well, I think the thing I've noticed first and foremost is that the underpinnings of what we do, the foundation of code enforcement and how it works and the challenges it takes on, are the same everywhere we go.
Yep.
And so I've landed in an environment that is exceptionally welcoming and is, a great operation. And the themes and the challenges of what we're working on here are the same ones that I left in California. And so it's not it's not that much different from the nuts and bolts of it. Of course, you've got different state laws and different practices, and different things in place that you adapt to. But I think that anybody that's looking to make a professional change, and you're right, I was not at all stuck in a rut where I was. I absolutely loved and will miss the folks at the City of Elk Grove. But it was, an opportunity that came up here that I just thought was, good for my professional development and good for my family, and something that I wanted to dive right in on. And so I looked at the requirements and the tools and stuff I would need. And one of the greatest things I think I found is that, being involved with the associations, being involved in ICC, and the way ICC does its partnership with ACE and certifications and stuff like that, creates a great foundation to be able to bring the underpinnings of what you need and transport those to anywhere in the country. And so, I'm an ACE ICC certified code enforcement administrator. That is something that, as you achieve that certification, it provides all of the foundational knowledge and experience you need, so that wherever you're landing, that at least you're starting off on the right foot. and that, yeah, you have to learn the local details, and you have to learn, to what the citizens you're serving now are looking for you to emphasize. But uh, I wouldn't discourage anybody from pausing and really looking and saying, what's out there next. What code enforcement, for better or for worse, is one of those things that sometimes you can get pigeonholed in, and there's not always a direct upward mobility from code enforcement officer to the city manager's office.
Yep.
It's like, if you're really wanting to move up in local government, what do you do? And for somebody that's newer or younger in code enforcement, you may want to start looking at some of those broader perspectives, learning more about what public works is doing, or getting some of the building certifications in inspection or in plan check, and that sort of thing, and really understanding the broader perspective, because then as you apply for positions or you look at opportunities that are out there, you bring all of those tools you have before with you. And the one thing I think that has us, gives us a leg up in code enforcement, is that in most places, if you're in code enforcement, you are involved and engaged in so many different areas of local government that people working in other disciplines are not necessarily going to be exposed to or engaged in. And so you're going to have an understanding as to what public works is doing with their MS4 EPA permits, and with stormwater discharge, and what building safety is doing with their permitting process, and with the challenges they're taking on, and how PD is approaching these pop cases or various things that the police department takes on that intersect with code enforcement. You have a good foundation in code enforcement to move into that generalist area of local government, because you have an exposure to all these things and have an understanding as to how they're operating. So I would tell everybody to just continue to always be learning, to continue to always be exposing yourself to new ideas and to new concepts, and then don't be shy about throwing your hat in the ring when the opportunity seems right.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because some of us have thought about moving out of state, and then you say, what's out there? And it's funny because me doing what I do, I get to talk to a lot of people in Florida and Texas, and I'm all over the place. So, and I love what I do because I get to learn. And one of the things I've learned in the last couple of years is, like, what, the foundation of code enforcement is the same throughout the United States. It's exactly the same. And that we have no standardization out there. That's something that we say, hey, you know what, yeah, you're in planning, but guess what, there's these tools in building, and then in PD, and all these, and sometimes you see some cities balk. I'm like, well, we don't do that. I'm like, well, why? You have to ask those questions. And it comes down to, some jurisdictions just don't like stirring the pot,
Sure.
because it causes more work. But at the time, but then it's the same communities that complain that your code enforcement isn't doing anything, or they called and you're not, what? How come so and so gets away with it, and not, you're punishing me, and you're, once you have a standardized program, and that's why PD is code enforcement PD sometimes is very effective, because they tend to be in a silo where, like, hey, you're violating the law. This is what it is, and there you go. And where community development, you kind of have to kind of maneuver and stuff a little bit more. So you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you do. You have to be flexible. And I think that, everybody has to understand the environment they're working in. Of course, they need to respect the constraints or the strategies that their city or their county wants them to take on and not to take on. But I think that at least always taking a position to where you express a willingness, and you sort of lean into having an attitude of wanting to be helpful and problem solving with the partners in your agency, creates a circumstance where, when the time or the opportunity is right, they'll leverage that, and they'll know, oh, code enforcement's able to help with that, or they're willing to help with that. Let's talk to the team there and see what they're able to do. And it provides a development opportunity for the staff or the team there to be able to be exposed to new things, and then that helps personal professional development as well.
Yeah. No, I get it, but yeah, it's interesting, and just seeing your move. Like at first I saw Carrie and Carl move over to Texas. Now you're moving over to Texas, and getting to know a lot of the supervisors in Texas. Like I told you, you're in good company. You have
Absolutely.
Jose
Yes.
out there. He's running for the board. He's an awesome guy. Cristela Miles, awesome. You have Pasco, Texas. They're setting doing stuff for credentialing. They're doing some stuff, so that's awesome stuff. It's just great to see, just Texas kind of growing. It's awesome to see, you know, and
Yeah, I feel like I've landed in a great environment here. I mean, the city, specifically where I'm at in Irving, is it's just a great operation with a lot of great people, and then having familiar faces in the region is reassuring. And we're not, by no means, there's not an invasion from Cal. We're not looking to take over, but it's there's a talent pool here that I was honored to join, and I think we're individually the cities we work with, and collectively I can see us continuing to network and do great things.
Well, shouts out to Texas. You got your kudos today. California's loss is Texas gain, but still, But Shane, we really appreciate you being on the show today. It's always a great pleasure to hear from industry leaders, and love what you did in California. I'm looking forward to what you're going to do in Texas, and trust me, I'm watching everything. So it's awesome. And once you get settled, maybe we'll have back on the show and say, hey, how's the experience? What are you guys working on? And getting that stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for inviting me, and it's great. It's always a terrific opportunity to be able to connect with people and to share whatever my insights might be able to be of help with, and then in turn connect with people that can help me learn.
Well, Cabo is by far premier organization. Thank you for your
Thank you.
service. You've done some great work. I got to network with you, and it's always a pleasure. So thank you very much. And everybody, we will see you next week. And, thank you everybody for contributing to the chats. So with that, we'll see
Thanks,
you next
Charlie.
week.